So today we have to discuss a topic that's a separate issue in Kodshim, in the constellation of Kodshim, which is called Vlados, and specifically the case of a Vlad of a Balas Mu. So we're now on page Vav on the bottom right. Karbono Shinifs. What's the status if an animal became puzzle? Let's say she got a mum, and the child of that balas mum is royal mizbeach, meaning it's a tam. There's no blemish on the child, on the offspring. Yesh mehem, in certain cases, sulon chal gamal vlodosein. And this is kind of an expression of a general principle which is called yotzim in asur asur, that whatever comes from isur, the source was isur, the product has the same status as the original source. For example, if you have a non-kosher animal, the milk of the non-kosher animal has the same status as the animal itself, and it is tameh. Here too, since the mother is a carbon that's psul, that psul is now transferred over to the vlad. So the vlad that's born, even though it doesn't have that same blemish, is excluded. So that sanctity and status of the mother is now transferred over to the child. The sanctity of the mother is a kedusha, but not lemizbeach, because the mother has a blemish. However, there's another category of vlados. Yesh, in certain situations, the psul is not transferred over to the vlad. Ein havlados psul mishum psul ima. Gam, and now we go to the left column. Gam b'vlados shenifsalu mishum psul imam. Even in the first case, the first category, where we do transmit the psul from the mother to the child, it's so interesting because in modern biology, they talk about certain diseases that are passed through the umbilical cord, to the child. So that's what we're talking about now. We're talking about a psul that passes through the umbilical cord to the child, to the vlad. Even within that context, that category, we have to subdivide. It's like a flow chart here. Yesh mehem shedmehem kravim l'shem oso korban shahayu kidoshim u'l'shem ba'aleim. In certain cases, when we transmit the psul from the mother to the child, then we can be poda the child, just like we could be poda the mother, who's a balas mum. And in such a case, when you poda a bal mum, the money has to be designated for the original carbon and for the person who was interested in bringing the carbon, and that status is now transferred over to the vlad. So the vlad itself has the status of its mother as a psul of balas mum. Its damim, when you poda it, will be earmarked for that original carbon. It's interesting, you're going back a generation, meaning the vlad, after its pigeon, the money is going to be earmarked for the same kedusha and the carbon that the mother was earmarked for. But yesh mehem, now we have another category where even though we transmit the status of the mother to the child, to the vlad, it's not identical. Kravim li olas nedovas tzibur. We're going to take those monies and we're going to put it into a bank that belongs to the tzibur, and the ola that can be brought, the carbon that can be brought from those monies that are placed in a bank for the tzibur, for karbonos tzibur, is going to be designated for an ola. Right? We have four categories of karbonos. We have chatos, we have asham, we have shlomim, and we have an ola. Shlomim is generally speaking limited to various categories. Ola is a kind of all-inclusive kind of a category of a carbon. And in a case where you have monies that were designated for the tzibur, then those monies are used for a carbon olah. That's just the rule of the game. So we have now a situation where the mother, as a balas mum, the monies that are derived from the pigeon are dedicated to that same carbon, which might be a chatos and asham, which could be a shlamim. But in the Vlad situation, that inherits the psul mizbeach, and now we do a pigeon as if it were a balas mum, those monies are dedicated to the tzibur, and they will be used to purchase an olas nidava of the tzibur. Below mum, lefisha enam kidoshim elabituchas dam. Then we're going to have another category of a case where we could be poder without a mum, and that's because the original kedusha was only a kedusha's dam. So let's say, for example, if at the time of at the moment of the hakdasha, the animal was already a balas mum, that hakdasha could only go as far as kedusha's damim, what we call bedek habayis. In which case the pigeon would be monies of hegdish, of bedek habayis. And in some cases, that law of pigeon will apply to the vlad. Even though the mother was originally a tamim, a tam, at the time of the Akdasha, the mother became a balas mum, and then we're bound and restricted by the laws of a pigeon of psulei Akdashim of balas mum, and the money will be earmarked for a carbon, and in this case, the same identical carbon as the mother was originally sanctified or designated for. But in a case of a mother which is a balas mum from the get-go, and therefore its kedusha is only that of a kedusha's damin, the vlad, likewise, even though it has no mum, will be nifter as kedusha's damin. The yesh mehem shetzrichim mum lipados. In certain cases, we will not allow and recognize the validity of pigeon of the vlad unless the vlad itself becomes a balas mum. And the reason for that is because the kedusha of the mother is a kedushas haguf limizbeach, just that it became a balas mum. So when it becomes a balas mum, it doesn't leave the entire category of kedusha saguf. It's just a kedusha saguf that cannot express itself in actuality, reality, as a carbon on the mizbeach because of the mum. That's just a blockage. And then afkamina is that the vlad has a full-fledged kedusha saguf, even the mizbeach, because the vlad has no mum. So in the classic case of Vlad Psulei HaMukdashim, we're talking about a case where the mother was designated originally for the Mizbeach and she was a tam without any blemish. Subsequently, she developed a blemish. After that, she gave birth to a Vlad. That's called Vlad Bali Mumin. In the next paragraph, Lodot shenoldu li'em balas mum shekadam hekdeshas muma, meaning at the time that you designated the animal as a karban, that hakdasha was a mum, was a tam. There was no mum. The mum came about later, subsequently. Lifnei pijona shel ha'em, and now the animal, the mother, has become a balas mum, and the Vlad was born to that mother before the pigeon, obviously before the pigeon. I don't know why he makes a big deal about Lifnei Pijona Shala'im. He has a footnote on that. Fine. I think that footnote is about another point entirely. But as far as that point of Lifnei Pijona Shala'im, I think that's obvious. Because after the pigeon of the aim, we're left with, again, I'm going a little bit too far, but a behemas chulin. That's not exactly so, but I think for our purposes, just to fudge it on top, we can call it a behemas chulin, and the vlad therefore is chulin. In order to establish the hegdesh, the kedusha of the vlad, we have to assume that the mother was not yet subject to pigeon. So you've got time T1, T2, T3, T4. T1 is the moment of hagdosh. At that point, the animal was a tam, and she had a full-fledged kedusha guf l'mizbech. Then we get to time T2. Never she swallowed a nail, and she became a balas mum. Then we get to time T3, and she gives birth to a vlad. The vlad is a tam. At time T4, we were podeh the mother. But it's very important to emphasize, but it's almost obvious, move on me'elav, as we say, that the pigeon of the mother did not take place before she gave birth to the vlad. Otherwise, we have nothing to talk about, nothing to discuss here in terms of the status of the vlad in Heged. Nechleku amoroim, and here he tells you in footnote Kufyud Beis that this is a sugya in Masechta Bechorah. Now, till now, we've been learning a sugya in Masechta Tmura. Im Vlad Bali Mumim Karet. This is not brand new to us. We've discussed this in the context of Tmura. What's the status of a Tmuras Behemas Balas Mum? And we said that there was a vestige of Kedushas Aguf, and it's that Kedushas Aguf that you are cloning onto the substitute, onto the Tmura. And that Kedushas Aguf is a Kedusha L'Mizbeach, and therefore the Tmura can be brought on the Mizbeach. The same thing applies in the Vlad, according to this Amora, that even though the mother now is a Balas Mum and she's excluded from the Mizbeach, her basic fundamental Kedusha, the inherent latent Kedusha, is a Kedushas Mizbeach. And it's that Kedusha that's transferred over to the Vlad. So the Vlad is now royal Mizbeach, insofar as the fact that the Vlad is a Tam and not a Balmum. Now we get to the second opinion amongst the Amoraim. Yira achi stavi mochel l'shem oso korban she'imo choisa kedosha bo. We're not going to take the vlad of a behemas balmum and be makriv on the mizbeach. We can't do that because the kedusha of the vlad is identical to the kedusha of its mother. That goes back to the principle that we mentioned at the outset of Yotzi, that the product and the vlad has the same status as the mother. And therefore, just like the mother who has the status of a balas mum, and the pigeon therefore will require that we earmark the monies of the pigeon to the same carbon that the mother was kadosh when the original akadosh took place, so too that same halacha, that same set of rules and regulations will now be imposed on the vlad. And therefore the vlad is going to become a balmum, and it will be poded to the same carbon that the original mother was designated. Kufyud Gimel. All right, fine. Apparently, it's a difficult Rashi. V'nechleku rishonim b'davar. All right, we're going to have now machlokes rishonim. And apparently, Kufyud Daled, there's going to be a shita here of Rabbeinu Gershom That was the Rebbe of Rashi. Yesh min harishonim. All right, this is Roman numeral number one. One how should we say, membership club of Rishonim, one group. So L'shitas Chachamim, again, we mentioned this Machlokas Rishonim. I'm sorry, the Machlokas Amoraim, that's what we started with, as to whether or not the Vlad of a Balas Mum can be brought on the Mizbech, or we give it the same identical status, we wait for it to have a mum and we pose it. So according to the Shitas Chachamim, Shahamafrish Nekeva Liola. You remember that we checked this out yesterday. Steve, you remember this? That an Ola has to be min hazach. Yes? Yeah, I always want to make a photocopy of that chart. You have it in front of you in any, so maybe you'll get a chance to make a photocopy. We'll paste it on the wall here. And a carbon Ola has to come from a zachmi. He went ahead and he was mafresh a nekeva as a carbon Ola. Now, obviously, you can't bring a nekeva as a carbon Ola. However, this nekeva that was designated and sanctified for the purpose of an Ola now gave birth to a Zach. So the Vlad is a male. Does the Vlad have the status of its mother, just that it's a male, and therefore it is a carbon Ola that can be brought on the Mizbech? So some Rishonim say there's no way, no how, that you can take the Vlad at the Zachar and be makrivid on the Mizbeach as a carbon Ola. That's the sheet of the Chachamim. Again, we'll see a dissenting view in just a minute, but now we're analyzing the sheet of the Chachamim. And their shita is that it's absolutely universally accepted that you cannot bring the Vlad of a mafresh nekeva liola as a carbon on the Mizbech. It's got to be yira ad sheyistayev. We have to wait till it becomes a balmum, and then we'll do pidyon. But according to this sheet in the Chacham, Chol Modim Shein Karet. And the logic of that is that the Vlad cannot be superior to the mother. The mother can't be brought on the Mizbeach. How could the Vlad be brought on the Mizbeach? You'll ask me, but the mother was in a keva and the Vlad is a Zachar. The answer is that the Kedusha and status of the Vlad is an extension, a reflection of the status of the mother. If the mother cannot be brought on the Mizbeach because an Akeva cannot be brought as a carbon Ola, then the Vlad, even though he's a Zachar, cannot be brought on the Mizbeach. And therefore, if we go back to the original issue that we were relating to, meaning the Vlad of a Balmum, a Balasmum, and we said that according to one school of thought, the Vlad of a Balasmum is Yira Ad Sheyistayev, no way that you could bring it on the Mizbeach. There's a certain analogy, a certain almost mirror image of these two halachas. One halacha is the Vlad of the Vlad Zohar of an Olas Nekeva, and it was saying, according to the Shitz Chachamim, everybody agrees that this Vlad cannot be brought as a Karbonola on the Mizbeach because it nourishes its Kedusha or draws its Kedusha from the mother, and the mother was in a Keva, and therefore Yirad Shiyistayv, and a mirror image would be the Vlad of a Balas Mum. And just like the mother cannot be brought on the Mizbeach, the child, the Vlad, has the same status as the mother, cannot be brought on the Mizbeach, even though it's a Tam. You see the same idea. In the case of Ola, the Vlad is a Zohar. And in and of itself, he should be brought on the Mizbeach. In the case of a Vlad of a Baal Mum, the Vlad is a Tam and should be able to be brought on the Mizbeach. But the answer is no, because the Vlad draws its Kedusha, its nourishment, through the umbilical cord of its mother, and the mother's Kedusha is not a Kedusha's Mizbeach, neither in the case of Balas Mum, nor in the case of an Akeva of an Ola. So just like the mother would have the status of Yeroad Shiyistayv, so too the Vlad has that same status. So Ad Kan Shitas Chacham. Now we have the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer. Just 1 second. Have we seen this before? Or is this the first time we're meeting up with Rabbi Eliezer? I don't think that he mentioned Rabbi Eliezer before. Does anybody disagree with me? What?
I don't remember.
Rabbi Eliezer holds that the Vlad of an Akeva Ola can be brought as a carbon Ola because the Vlad is a Zohar. I mean, again, leaving out the Sugyas HaGemara and the Psukim, just intuitively, it's counterintuitive. Because we've always assumed that the Kedusha of the Vlad is drawn from the Kedusha of its mother. And the Kedusha of its mother is not a Kedusha's Mizbeach. How could the Vlad be Ola as a Korban Ola on the Mizbeach? So we don't have access to the Sugya and the derivation for Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Eliezer will take Rabbi Eliezer at face value. The whole Chisaron in the case of the mother was because an Akeva cannot serve as an Ola, but now the Vlad is a Zohar, and it can be an Ola. And it inherits the Kedusha of Mizbeach from the mother, despite the fact that the mother could never be brought on the Mizbeach as an Ola. But the Vlad is a Zohar, and therefore there's no impediment. It will be brought on the Mizbeach. So now let's ask the following question. According to Rabbi Elazar, is there a mirror image in the case of a Balas Mum, where the Vlad of a Balas Mum is not a Balas Mum, it's a Tam, and therefore we should bring it on the Mizbeach? No, we're not going to say that. Mikomakom Vlad Bali Mumim Eno Karev Yatz. A Pelev of Chidush. I might have said just the opposite, Kal V'chol, but the Gemara is assuming that somehow the mum is such a profound hafkah in terms of the Kedushas Mizbeach of the mother, that the Vlad of the Balas certainly cannot be brought on the Mizbeach. But in the case of an Akeva, the Akeva is not a Balas Mum. She has like a full-fledged Kedushas Mizbeach, such that according to Rabbi Lazar, the Vlad can be brought, the Vlad and Zachar can be brought on the Mizbeach. I mean, logically, I don't know logically, I shouldn't say logically, but intuitively, I would have come to the exact opposite conclusion. Mum is a barrier. Nekeva is afka. It can't be included in the parish. It's not in the parish of a Karbanola. The Torah never recognized the Nekeva as a Karbanola. And now we're saying the exact opposite. We're saying that Nekeva is just a ma'akim. But it really is a Karban Ola in the full Kedusha of a Karban Ola. And that Kedusha is now transmitted to the Vlad, Zachar, going to be brought on the Mizbeach, according to Rabbi Lazar. But in the case of a Balas Mum, the Balas Mum establishes a brand new status of Kedusha, a Kedusha of a Balas Mum, which is Nitan Lebijon and so forth and so on. And that is the Kedusha that's being transmitted to the Vlad. But there's no Hava, meaning that you can bring it on the Mizbeach. Ach yesh min harishonim, we're on the base, hasover, she machlokes hamoroim hi l'divrei hakol, bein l'shitas Rabbi Lazar, bein l'shitas Chacham. Chad amar afilu l'chachamim, shavlad ha'ola eino karev, mikol makom vlad bali mumim karev h'biatz. Okay, this is more intuitive. When he says Vlad ha'ola, he means when the Ola was in a keva, the Vlad is Eino Karev, which made sense to us because when a keva is completely out of the ballpark. But not so in the case of Bali Mumin. Bali Mumin are excluded from the Mizbeach, but they're not mufka from Kedushas Karma. But for Chad Omar, Shafilu the Rabbi Lazar, Shavlad Ola, Karev, meaning even if the mother was a nekeva, the child, the Vlad, can be brought on the Mizbeach, right? And just without losing the place, keep your finger attached to the Gemara, but just look at the end of the previous paragraph, Aleph, where he says, El Shitas Rabbi Lazar Shomer Shah Mafrish Nekeva Li Ola V'Yolda Zochi Yikarev Liatzmo Ola. The Vlad, which is a Zachar, is brought as an Ola, even though its mother was an Akeva. Vlad Bali Mumim Eno Karev Liatzmo. Which again is that counterintuitive concept that Olas Nekeva is not so much of a problem. It's not so fundamental. Whereas Balas Mum is Afka, completely excluded, and therefore the Vlad of a Baal Mum doesn't have the Kedusha of Mizbeach. La Halacha Vlad Bali Mumim Karev Huliatz. Which again makes us feel comfortable because the mother was initially sanctified with a full-fledged Kedushas Mizbeach. Ella now Nafla Bamum, Nafal Bamum, and that is a ma'akif. That prevents her from being brought on the Mizbeach. But as far as the Vlad is concerned, we don't have that problem, that issue, that ma'akif, and therefore the Vlad is Karev Liatz. He has a footnote here, Kuf Tes Zayin. Oh, Ramam Sham, Ramam Perek Dalbif was Tmura. And if you go through these footnotes, you probably could keep yourself busy for who knows how long. I mean, to look up all the sources that he quotes in the note. So let's make a note of where we got up to here. We started Gimel, and we'll pick it up next week. Okay, then.